Hello there, fellow seekers of the unknown. How has your day been treating you? What time is it where you are in the world right now? Whether you're listening from a bustling city at noon or a quiet countryside at midnight, I hope you'll find what follows both fascinating and deeply unsettling. What do you think about conspiracies like this one? Do they make you question everything you thought you knew, or do they seem too far-fetched to believe? And more importantly, what conspiracy theories would you like us to explore next? Ancient civilizations hiding advanced technology, government cover-ups of extraterrestrial contact, the real power structures controlling world events from the shadows. Before we begin this journey into the hidden depths of one of the world's most secretive institutions, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. Your support helps us continue uncovering the stories they don't want you to hear, and your suggestions guide us toward the mysteries that intrigue you most. Now, settle in as we explore a tale that challenges everything we think we know about history, faith, and the very nature of human existence. The autumn rain drummed against the narrow windows of the Vatican archives as Lucian Roff pressed his trembling fingers against his temples. The headaches had been getting worse, sharp spikes of pain that seemed to pierce through his skull like divine punishment. At 62, he had spent nearly 4 decades in these hallowed halls, translating ancient texts and cataloguing secrets that most of the world would never know existed. The diagnosis had come 3 weeks earlier, delivered by a soft-spoken oncologist in a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. 6 months. Maybe 8 if he was fortunate. Lucian had sat in silence, watching the doctor's lips move but hearing only the thunderous beating of his own heart. Now, surrounded by millennia of accumulated knowledge, he faced a choice that would define whatever time remained to him. The secrets he had discovered in his years working within the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum burned in his mind like molten metal. Documents that shouldn't exist, translations that contradicted everything the faithful believed, evidence of truths so profound and terrifying that they had been buried beneath layers of papal authority and ecclesiastical bureaucracy. Lucian's fingers traced the edge of a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. For weeks he had wrestled with his conscience, knowing that what he was about to do would brand him as either a heretic or a truth-teller, depending on one's perspective. The weight of his impending mortality had clarified his thinking with brutal efficiency. If he died with these secrets, they would die with him, buried forever beneath the marble floors and golden domes of Vatican City. The first entry he made was dated October 15th, 1983. His handwriting, usually precise and scholarly, trembled slightly as he began to document what he'd seen in the restricted sections of the archives, areas so classified that even most cardinals were denied access. He wrote of Codex DN-77, a manuscript that had haunted his dreams for years, its content so explosive that it was stored in a vault that required 3 separate keys held by 3 different Vatican officials. The Codex purported to be the work of Pliny the Elder, the Roman author and naturalist, but it contained passages that no scholar had ever referenced, no historian had ever cited. According to the text, Pliny had witnessed something extraordinary in the skies over Jerusalem in the 1st century, something that had fundamentally altered the course of human civilization. Lucian paused in his writing, listening to the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. Even at this late hour, the Vatican never truly slept. Somewhere in the building, prelates and scholars continued their work, most of them unaware of the deeper secrets that lay buried beneath their feet. He continued writing, describing his discovery of documents that detailed what the manuscripts called the Messiah Protocol Alpha, a systematic program of religious engineering that had allegedly been implemented by Roman authorities in collaboration with beings that the text described as luminous, non-human, benevolent, falsely deified. The implications were staggering, suggesting that the very foundations of Christianity had been built upon a carefully constructed mythology designed to control and pacify the masses. The most disturbing discovery had been made just 6 months earlier, in a sub-basement that officially didn't exist. Lucian had been researching architectural blueprints from the 1930s when he noticed discrepancies in the building's layout. Certain areas were marked on older plans but absent from newer ones, as if entire sections of the Vatican had been erased from the official record. His investigation led him to a vault labelled Cavia Lux Noctis, the Hollow of Nightlight. Inside he had found objects that defied explanation. Crystalline tablets that hummed with an otherworldly energy, photographic negatives showing strange lights over the papal summer residence at Castel Gandolfo, and documents suggesting that the Vatican had been in contact with non-human intelligences for centuries. Lucian wrote feverishly through the night, his cancer-racked body sustained by adrenaline and purpose. He sketched the symbols he had seen on the crystalline tablets, transcribed fragments of text that seemed to have been written in languages that predated human civilization, and documented the locations of hidden chambers that honeycombed the foundations of St. Peter's Basilica like a secret city beneath the city. As dawn broke over Rome, painting the ancient stones in shades of gold and amber, Lucian sealed his manuscript in a waterproof envelope. He had already made arrangements with a trusted friend in Switzerland, a former seminary student named Heinrich Weber, who had left the church years earlier, but maintained his discretion and loyalty. The package would be mailed to Heinrich with instructions to hold it unopened for 40 years, then deliver it to someone who could make sense of its contents. 3 days later, as Lucian was leaving the archives for what he somehow knew would be the final time, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to see Cardinal Toretti, the prefect of the secret archives, watching him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Lucien," the cardinal said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of authority, "I trust you have found your work here fulfilling." "Indeed, Your Eminence," Lucian replied, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It has been the privilege of a lifetime." The cardinal smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression. "The Church has always valued discretion in her servants. I hope you will carry that virtue with you wherever your path may lead." Lucian nodded, understanding the threat that lay beneath the polite words. He walked away slowly, feeling the cardinal's gaze burning into his back like a brand. 2 weeks later, the Vatican announced that Lucian Roff had died peacefully in his sleep of natural causes. The obituary mentioned his decades of faithful service and his scholarly contributions to theological research. His body was cremated within 24 hours, as was his stated wish. Heinrich Weber never received the package. Dr. Calder had always prided himself on his scepticism. As a professor of historical linguistics at Cambridge, he had built his career on meticulous analysis and empirical evidence, traits that had made him particularly effective at debunking religious myths and exposing the human fingerprints on supposedly divine texts. His latest book, The Manufactured Divine, How Politics Shaped Religion, had earned him both academic acclaim and death threats from fundamentalist groups around the world. On a grey March morning in 2024, 41 years after Lucian Roff's death, Calder was grading papers in his cluttered office when his assistant knocked on the door. "Professor Vance, there's a package for you. No return address, but it's been through quite a journey by the look of it." The package was wrapped in brown paper that had clearly seen better days, held together with tape that was yellow with age. Calder's name and address were written in block letters with what appeared to be a fountain pen, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Inside the outer wrapping was a metal box, and inside that, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather journal and a letter written on expensive stationery. The letter was signed by someone named Marek Colvin, who identified himself as a former member of the Swiss Guard. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, as if each word had been chosen with great precision. "Professor Vance," the letter began, "I write to you because your reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths precedes you. 40 years ago I was entrusted with a package by a dying friend, a man named Heinrich Weber, who had himself been entrusted with it by someone he described only as a seeker of truth within the walls of lies. Heinrich passed away last month, and with his death, the responsibility has fallen to me." Calder set down the letter and examined the journal. The leather was soft with age, and the pages were filled with cramped handwriting in what appeared to be multiple languages. As he flipped through the pages, his trained eye caught fragments of Latin, Greek, Aramaic, and what looked like Sumerian cuneiform, alongside detailed sketches of symbols he didn't recognise. Returning to the letter, he read, "The journal belongs to Lucian Roth, who worked in the Vatican secret archives until his death in 1983. What you will find within its pages will challenge everything you believe about the origins of Christianity and the true history of human civilization. Lucian died trying to expose these secrets. Others have died since. I am old now, and I fear that I may not live long enough to see these truths brought to light. That responsibility now falls to you." The letter concluded with an address in the Swiss Alps and a warning. Trust no one within the church hierarchy. They have been watching for decades, waiting for someone to try to reveal what Lucian discovered. Be careful, Professor. The stakes are higher than you can imagine. Calder spent the next 3 hours poring over the journal, his academic excitement warring with a growing sense of unease. The fragments he could translate spoke of beings of light who had visited Earth in ancient times, of agreements between Roman authorities and non-human intelligences, and of a systematic program to rewrite human history and religious understanding. One passage, written in a mixture of Latin and ancient Greek, particularly caught his attention. The one they call Christ was never meant to be worshipped as God. He was a symbol, a construct built upon the memory of Eli Shun, the luminous one, who appeared to the Essenes in the wilderness and taught them of the greater cosmos beyond the earth. The Romans, in their fear of losing control, struck a bargain with forces they did not understand, agreeing to promote this false deity in exchange for technological knowledge that would cement their empire's dominance. The implications were staggering. If Lucian's translations were accurate, they suggested that Christianity itself was the product of a conspiracy involving not just human authorities, but non-human intelligences with their own mysterious agenda. Calder found detailed sketches of what Lucien called crystalline tablets, geometric objects covered in symbols that seemed to shift and flow across the page even in static drawings. The accompanying notes described them as emitting a low humming sound and generating a faint luminescence that became brighter when approached by certain individuals. Most intriguing of all were the architectural diagrams. Lucian had somehow obtained or created detailed blueprints of hidden sections beneath the Vatican, areas that he claimed housed artifacts and documents spanning thousands of years. One section was labelled Cavia Lux Noctis, with a note that it contained the source of their power and the proof of their deception. As night fell over Cambridge, Calder made a decision that would change the course of his life. He reached for his phone and began making arrangements for a sabbatical, ostensibly to research early Christian texts in Rome. In reality, he was planning to investigate the claims in Lucian's journal, to follow the trail of breadcrumbs that the dying archivist had left behind. He had no way of knowing that within hours of his first phone call, encrypted messages would begin flowing between Vatican City and secret facilities around the world. Messages that spoke of an old threat that had finally resurfaced, and the need for immediate action to protect secrets that had been guarded for nearly 2 millennia. The game had begun again, and this time the stakes were nothing less than the truth about humanity's place in the universe. Rome in April was alive with tourists and pilgrims, their voices creating a constant buzz of anticipation and wonder that echoed through the ancient streets. Calder had arrived 3 days earlier under the pretext of researching early Christian manuscripts for a new book on the evolution of religious language. His official credentials had gained him access to the public areas of the Vatican Library, but the real treasures he sought lay much deeper. He had arranged to meet Sister Teresa El-Huri at a small cafe near the Pantheon, far from the watchful eyes of Vatican security. The Dominican archivist had contacted him through encrypted channels after learning of his research interests, claiming to have information that might prove useful. What she hadn't mentioned in her carefully worded messages was that she had her own reasons for wanting to explore the Vatican's hidden depths. Sister Therese was younger than Calder had expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. She wore the simple white habit of her order, but there was nothing simple about the way she carried herself, alert, purposeful, like someone accustomed to moving through dangerous territory. "Professor Vance," she said, settling into the chair across from him, "I hope your research is proceeding well. Please call me Calder, and yes, though I suspect the most interesting materials are kept far from public view." She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. The Church has always been protective of its most precious documents. Some would say overly so. They spoke in carefully neutral terms for several minutes, each taking the measure of the other. Finally, Sister Therese leaned forward slightly and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "My brother died in a fire in the restricted archives 7 years ago. Officially, it was an accident, faulty wiring in a storage room. But Michel was an electrical engineer before he took his vows. He would never have been careless around electrical systems." Calder felt his pulse quicken. "What do you think really happened?" "I think he found something he wasn't supposed to find, and I think the people responsible for his death are still walking the halls of the Vatican, protected by their positions and their secrets." Over the next hour, Sister Therese revealed what she'd learned through years of careful investigation. Michel had been working in the deepest levels of the archives, cataloguing documents that dated back to the early days of the Church. In the weeks before his death, he had become increasingly agitated, speaking in vague terms about inconsistencies in the historical record and evidence that would shake the foundations of faith. The night he died, Michel had called her, speaking rapidly in the Lebanese Arabic of their childhood, words tumbling over each other in his excitement and fear. He claimed to have found architectural plans that showed sections of the Vatican that didn't match the official blueprints, areas that had been deliberately hidden from view. He was planning to investigate further the next morning. His body was found 12 hours later in what remained of a storage room 3 levels below the main archives. The fire had been so intense that it had melted metal filing cabinets and reduced centuries-old documents to ash. Michel's remains were barely identifiable, and the official investigation concluded that he had accidentally caused an electrical fire while working alone. "But I know my brother," Sister Therese said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "He was methodical, careful, and he was afraid of something in those final weeks. He kept talking about watchers in the walls and secrets that could topple empires." Calder reached into his jacket and withdrew a photocopy of one of Lucian's architectural diagrams. "Did your brother ever mention anything about a place called the Cavia Lux Noctis?" Sister Teresa's eyes widened as she studied the drawing. "This looks like the plans Michel was talking about. Where did you get this?" "From someone else who died trying to expose the truth." Calder gave her a condensed version of Lucian Roth's story and the journal that had found its way to him through decades of careful guardianship. As he spoke, he watched her face cycle through surprise, recognition, and grim determination. "We have to find this place," she said finally. "Whatever my brother discovered, whatever got him killed, is connected to what your Mr. Roth was trying to reveal." They spent the next 2 days planning their approach. Sister Teresa's position gave her access to areas of the Vatican that would be impossible for Calder to enter legitimately, while his linguistic expertise would be crucial for interpreting whatever they might find. Using a combination of Lucien's diagrams and Michel's notes, which Sister Therese had secretly copied before they were confiscated, they identified a route that would take them through maintenance tunnels and forgotten passages to the levels that officially didn't exist. Their chance came during the Feast of St. Mark, when much of the Vatican's attention would be focused on ceremonial duties and tourist management. Sister Therese used her credentials to enter the restricted sections after hours, ostensibly to continue cataloguing work that had fallen behind schedule. Calder followed a route she had mapped through the Vatican Gardens, entering through a maintenance entrance that she had left unlocked. The underground passages were a maze of stone corridors that seemed to stretch back through centuries of construction and renovation. They moved carefully, using small LED flashlights to navigate by the architectural diagrams that Lucian had so carefully preserved. The air grew colder and more oppressive as they descended, carrying with it the weight of accumulated secrets and forgotten history. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, they found what they were looking for, a heavy wooden door marked with symbols that matched those in Lucian's sketches. The lock was ancient but well maintained, suggesting that someone still accessed this area regularly. Sister Teresa produced a set of tools that seemed surprisingly sophisticated for a Dominican nun, and within minutes they had gained entry to the chamber beyond. The room was larger than they had expected, with walls lined with metal containers that bore the papal seal, but in a design that predated the current Vatican by decades. Each container was sealed with wax and marked with numbers and symbols that seemed to follow no system they could immediately decipher. It was Sister Teresa who found the container that would change everything. Marked with the number 77 and symbols that matched those in Lucian's journal, it contained objects that defied easy categorization. The crystalline tablets were exactly as Lucian had described them, geometric shapes that seemed to shift and flow in the beam of their flashlights, emitting a low humming sound that seemed to resonate in their bones. But it was the documents that truly shook them. Photographs showing strange lights over the papal summer residence at Castel Gandolfo, dating from the 1950s and 1960s. Correspondence between Vatican astronomers and unnamed consultants discussing continued observations of aerial phenomena. And most disturbing of all, transcripts of meetings between high-ranking church officials and individuals identified only as the luminous ones. As they photographed the documents with their phones, Calder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. The implications of what they were seeing went far beyond historical revisionism or religious scandal. If these documents were authentic, they suggested that the Vatican had been in contact with non-human intelligences for decades, possibly centuries. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside froze them both in place. Someone was coming, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged in these hidden depths. Sister Teresa quickly began returning the documents to their container, while Calder pocketed one of the smaller crystalline tablets, hoping that whatever analysis technology could reveal about its composition might provide crucial evidence. They barely managed to reseal the container and extinguish their lights before the door opened, and a figure in cardinal's robes entered the chamber. In the darkness, they couldn't make out his face, but his voice carried the authority of high office as he spoke into what appeared to be a radio or phone. "The old seals remain intact," the figure said in Italian-accented English. "No sign of disturbance, but maintain the watch. The Prophet Marek was right to be concerned. The seeds planted by the translator 40 years ago are finally beginning to sprout." Calder and Sister Teresa remained frozen in the shadows as the Cardinal made a cursory inspection of the chamber before leaving, his footsteps fading back down the corridor. Only when they were certain he was gone did they dare to move, making their way back through the labyrinthine passages with hearts hammering and minds reeling from what they had discovered. As they emerged into the cool Roman night, neither spoke of what they had witnessed, but both understood that they had crossed a line from which there could be no return. They were no longer researchers or scholars pursuing academic truth. They were fugitives in possession of secrets that powerful people were willing to kill to protect. The real question was what they were going to do about it. The ancient text lay spread across Calder's hotel room desk like a roadmap to heresy. Using high-resolution photographs of Codex DN77 that Sister Teresa had managed to capture during their clandestine exploration, he had spent 3 sleepless days working to translate passages that seemed to rewrite the entire foundation of Western civilization. The document purported to be a lost work of Pliny the Elder, written in a mixture of Latin and Greek that suggested multiple authors or editors across different time periods. But unlike Pliny's known works, which focused on natural history and observable phenomena, this codex dealt with events that challenged the very nature of reality itself. The central narrative concerned events that had allegedly taken place in Palestine during the 1st century of the Common Era. According to the text, Pliny had been part of a Roman delegation sent to investigate reports of unusual phenomena in the region, lights in the sky, mysterious figures appearing to local populations, and disturbing reports of people claiming to have received divine revelations. What Pliny claimed to have discovered was far more complex and troubling than simple religious enthusiasm. The text described encounters with beings that were clearly not human, entities that the Romans came to call luminous ones. due to their apparent ability to manipulate light and energy in ways that defied understanding. These beings, according to the Codex, had been observing human civilization for millennia, occasionally intervening in human affairs for reasons that remained opaque. The most shocking revelation concerned the figure that history would come to know as Jesus of Nazareth. According to Pliny's account, the historical Jesus had been a minor teacher and healer, one of many charismatic figures who attracted followers in the religiously turbulent Palestine of the 1st century. But the Jesus of Christian tradition, the divine figure whose teachings would reshape the world, was largely a Roman construction, built upon fragments of the real man's life and teachings, but augmented with elements borrowed from encounters with the luminous ones. The Codex described a specific entity called Relaxation, who had appeared to a group of Essene mystics in the wilderness near the Dead Sea. Unlike other luminous ones who seemed content to observe from a distance, Relaxation had actively engaged with the humans, sharing knowledge about the nature of the cosmos and humanity's place within a vast community of intelligent species. The Essenes had been deeply influenced by these revelations, incorporating them into their religious practices and spreading accounts of Relaxation's teachings throughout Palestine. Some of these teachings had eventually reached the followers of Jesus, who began to conflate their fallen leader with the radiant being who had appeared to the Essenes. Roman authorities, initially concerned about the potential for religious unrest, had eventually seen an opportunity. Working in collaboration with certain factions among the luminous ones, factions that apparently disagreed with Relaxation's policy of direct intervention, the Romans had developed what the Codex called Messiah Protocol Alpha. The protocol was breathtaking in its cynical sophistication. By promoting a carefully constructed version of the Jesus story, one that combined the man's genuine teachings with miraculous elements borrowed from accounts of Relaxation, the Romans could satisfy the religious yearnings of their subjects while maintaining political control. The divinity of Jesus would be established not through earthly power, but through spiritual authority, making resistance to Roman rule seem not just futile but sacrilegious. But the most disturbing aspect of the protocol was the collaboration it represented. According to Pliny's account, certain factions among the luminous ones had actively assisted in the construction of the Jesus mythology, providing technological knowledge that would help cement Roman dominance while ensuring that humanity remained ignorant of the broader cosmic community, of which Earth was merely a small part. The Codex included detailed descriptions of technologies that the Romans had received as part of this arrangement, methods for working metals that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries, architectural techniques that explain the seemingly impossible engineering feats of Roman construction, and most significantly, communication devices that allowed coordination across the vast distances of the empire. As Calder worked through the translations, he found himself constantly cross-referencing the text with historical records, looking for evidence that might support or contradict Pliny's extraordinary claims. To his growing amazement, many details that seemed impossible at first glance actually aligned with known historical anomalies. The sudden technological advances of the 1800s late Roman period, the unusually rapid spread of Christianity throughout the empire, and the curious gaps in the historical record concerning the earliest Christian communities. The photographic evidence that Sister Teresa had captured provided additional context. The images from Castel Gandolfo, dating from the 1950s and 1960s, showed luminous objects in the sky above the papal summer residence, objects that defied conventional explanation. The accompanying documentation suggested that Vatican astronomers had been tracking and communicating with these phenomena for decades, treating them not as unexplained curiosities, but as known entities with whom some form of dialogue was maintained. Most intriguing of all were the transcripts of meetings between church officials and representatives of what the documents called the Covenant. These sessions, which appeared to take place on a regular basis, involved discussions of mutual interests and the maintenance of established protocols. The language was diplomatic and carefully neutral, but the implications were clear. The Vatican was actively collaborating with non-human intelligences, just as their Roman predecessors had done nearly 2,000 years earlier. One transcript dated from 1959 included a particularly revealing exchange. A Vatican official, identified only as Cardinal P, expressed concern about increasing scrutiny from secular authorities and the growing sophistication of detection technologies. The response from someone identified as Delegate 7 was reassuring. The protocols established in the 1st century remain viable. Adjustment may be necessary, but the fundamental structure of the arrangement serves all parties well. The meeting concluded with discussion of increased activity at secondary sites and the need for enhanced security measures at traditional repositories. Reading this in the context of Lucian Roth's discoveries, Calder realised that the Vatican's secret archives were just one part of a much larger network of hidden facilities where evidence of extraterrestrial contact was stored and managed. As he worked late into the night, translating increasingly disturbing passages, Calder began to understand the true scope of what Lucian had uncovered. This wasn't simply a matter of religious fraud or historical deception, it was evidence of a conspiracy that spanned millennia, involving not just human institutions but non-human intelligences with their own mysterious agenda. The crystalline tablet that he had taken from the Vatican storage room sat on his desk, its strange geometric patterns seeming to shift in his peripheral vision. Several times during his translation work, he had noticed that the tablet seemed to respond to his proximity, glowing more brightly when he leaned closer to examine the ancient texts. The phenomenon was subtle, but unmistakable, as if the object was somehow attuned to his activities. Outside his hotel window, the eternal city of Rome spread out in a carpet of ancient stone and modern lights, unaware that beneath its foundations lay secrets that could redefine humanity's understanding of its own history. Calder felt the weight of that knowledge settling on his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility and danger. Tomorrow, he would need to decide what to do with what he had learned. The safe choice would be to return to England, to lock away the photographs and translations and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But Lucian Roth had died trying to bring these truths to light, and Michel El-Houry had paid with his life for getting too close to the same secrets. As dawn broke over the 7 hills of Rome, Calder Vance made a decision that would either make him the most important truth-teller in human history, or ensure that he joined the ranks of those who had died trying to expose the greatest conspiracy ever perpetrated against the human race. The first sign that Calder was being watched came on his 4th morning in Rome. He had developed a routine over the past few days: breakfast at a small cafe near the Pantheon, a morning walk through the Roman Forum to clear his head before diving into translation work, then long hours in his hotel room poring over the photographs and documents that Sister Teresa had risked her life to obtain. But this morning, the elderly man reading a newspaper at the corner table was the same one who had been standing near the Trevi fountain when Calder had walked past the previous afternoon. When Calder deliberately changed his route to test his suspicions, taking a roundabout path through narrow side streets, he glimpsed the same figure reflected in shop windows, always maintaining a careful distance but never losing sight of his target. By the time he returned to his hotel, Calder's academic curiosity had transformed into genuine fear. The implications of what he had discovered were serious enough to warrant official attention, but the speed with which surveillance had been deployed suggested that his activities had been monitored from the beginning. His suspicions were confirmed when he entered his hotel room to find subtle signs of disturbance. Books moved slightly from their original positions, his laptop showing signs that it had been powered on despite being shut down when he left, and most tellingly, the crystalline tablet shifted a few inches from where he had carefully positioned it on the desk. Calder's first instinct was to flee, to pack his belongings and take the first flight back to England, where the familiar environment of Cambridge might provide some measure of safety. But as he stood in his compromised hotel room, holding the evidence of humanity's greatest secret, he realised that running would accomplish nothing. If they wanted to silence him, geography would provide no protection. His only hope lay in making the information public before they could stop him. He spent the next hour methodically documenting everything, photographing the translations he had completed, creating backup copies of the Vatican documents on multiple encrypted drives, and composing a detailed summary of his findings that could be understood by journalists and academics who lacked his specialised knowledge. It was while he was uploading these files to a secure cloud server that his laptop screen flickered and went black. When it rebooted, He found that his internet connection had been severed despite showing a strong signal. Someone with considerable technical sophistication was actively interfering with his communications. The knock on his door came precisely at sunset, gentle but insistent. Through the peephole, Calder saw a woman in her 30s wearing the simple business attire of a hotel employee, but her posture and the way her eyes scanned the corridor spoke of professional training that had nothing to do with hospitality management. "Professor Vance," she called softly, "I have a message for you." Calder remained silent, his hand hovering over his phone as he debated whether to call the police. But what would he tell them? That he was being stalked because he had stolen ancient documents from the Vatican? That he had evidence of extraterrestrial contact but no way to prove its authenticity? "I know you're listening," the woman continued, her voice carrying a subtle accent that might have been Eastern European. "The message is from Sister Therese. She wants to meet you at the usual place, but she's concerned about security. She suggests you use the alternate route you discussed." The lie was sophisticated enough to be believable. Sister Therese had indeed suggested several meeting locations during their planning sessions, but they had never discussed any alternate route, and the phrasing was wrong, too formal for the way the nun actually spoke. Calder remained motionless until he heard footsteps retreating down the corridor. When he checked the peephole again, the hallway was empty, but he had no doubt that watchers remained nearby, patient and professional. His phone, when he finally retrieved it from the desk drawer where he had left it, showed 17 missed calls from a number he didn't recognise. The voicemail messages that had been left were brief and cryptic. "The archive remembers. Trust the Swiss. Avoid the gardeners." The caller's voice was electronically distorted, but the urgency was unmistakable. As night fell over Rome, Calder found himself trapped in a game whose rules he didn't understand, surrounded by players whose motivations remained opaque. His academic training had prepared him for scholarly debates and peer review, not for the lethal politics of institutional secrets that powerful forces were willing to kill to protect. The breakthrough came at midnight when his phone received a text message from an unknown number. "Hotel Artemide. Room 347. Come alone. Trust no elevators. ST double quote. Sister Therese." The Hotel Artemide was 6 blocks away, far enough to require careful navigation through the narrow streets of central Rome. If this was genuinely from her, it represented an opportunity to coordinate their next moves. If it was a trap, he would likely disappear into the vast machinery of institutional power that had already claimed Lucien Roth and Michel Elouri. Calder spent 20 minutes preparing for what might be his final act of academic inquiry. He sealed copies of his most important findings in envelopes addressed to journalists and researchers around the world, leaving them with the hotel's concierge along with instructions to mail them if he failed to return within 24 hours. The crystalline tablet he wrapped carefully and secured in an inside pocket of his jacket. If nothing else, its unusual properties might provide physical evidence that could support his claims. The journey to the Hotel Artemide became a masterclass in urban evasion. Using techniques he had learned from thriller novels and action movies, Calder doubled back through narrow alleys, ducked into churches and shops to observe potential followers, and generally behaved like someone who had watched too many spy films and not enough real surveillance operations. Despite his amateur efforts, he felt confident that he had avoided detection by the time he reached the hotel. The lobby was elegant and dimly lit, populated by the usual mixture of tourists and business travellers that gave Rome its cosmopolitan character. Room 347 was on the 3rd floor, accessible by a staircase that allowed him to avoid the elevators as the message had advised. Sister Therese opened the door before he could knock, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. She was no longer wearing her religious habit, instead dressed in civilian clothes that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "Thank God you came," she said, pulling him into the room and quickly securing the multiple locks on the door. "They took me this morning, held me for 6 hours asking questions about what we found in the archives." Calder felt his blood run cold. "Who took you?" "Vatican security. Men in expensive suits who knew things about my brother's death that were never in any official report." Sister Therese moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. "They knew about you, about Lucien Roth, about the journal. They've been watching this situation develop for decades. She turned back to him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. But they made a mistake. While they were questioning me, I overheard a phone conversation. There's something called Custodes Solis, Keepers of the Sun, some kind of Jesuit black operations group that handles what they call threats to the Eternal Mission. And Calder, they're planning to activate something called a final protocol. What kind of protocol? I don't know exactly, but they mentioned the Cavia Lux Noctis. They're moving something tomorrow night during the papal audience. Whatever we found down there, they're either relocating it or destroying it. Calder pulled out his phone to show her the cryptic messages he had received, but Sister Teresa shook her head. No electronic communications. They can intercept anything. That's how they found me so quickly after our expedition. She handed him a piece of paper with an address written in pencil. This came from the Swiss guard who contacted you, Marek Colvin. He's here in Rome, and he has information about getting back into the restricted areas. But he says this is our last chance. After tomorrow night, the evidence will be gone forever. As if summoned by their conversation, a soft knock came at the door. Both of them froze, but the voice that called out was elderly and carried a distinctive Swiss-German accent. "Sister Therese, it is Marek. We have little time." The man who entered was in his 70s, lean and alert with the bearing of someone accustomed to military discipline. His eyes were the pale blue of alpine ice, and they took in every detail of the room with practiced efficiency. "Professor Vance," he said, extending a weathered hand, "I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but subtlety is no longer an option. They are preparing to eliminate all traces of what Lucian discovered, and they will eliminate anyone who has seen the evidence." Marek moved to the table and spread out a detailed floor plan of the Vatican that was far more comprehensive than anything Calder had seen before. "I spent 23 years protecting the Pope, but I also spent those years learning where the real secrets are kept. Tomorrow night, during the public audience, most of the security will be focused on the Basilica and the public areas. That gives us a narrow window to reach the Cavia Lux Noctis and document whatever they're preparing to destroy." "Document it how?" Calder asked. "Our photographs from the first expedition barely scratched the surface." Marek smiled grimly and produced a small device that looked like a cross between a camera and a scientific instrument. "Video documentation, full spectrum analysis, and most importantly, this will record any electromagnetic phenomena associated with the crystalline artifacts. If we can capture evidence of their otherworldly properties, we'll have proof that can't be dismissed as academic speculation." Sister Therese studied the floor plans with the intensity of someone whose life depended on understanding every detail. "The route is more complex this time. They've increased security around the areas we accessed before. But there's an older path, through the crypt of St. Peter himself. It hasn't been used for centuries, but it connects to the lower levels." As they planned their final expedition, Calder felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Everything that had led to this moment, Lucian's dying confession, Heinrich Weber's decades of patient guardianship, Marek's careful preservation of dangerous secrets, had been building toward this single opportunity to expose truths that had been hidden for nearly 2 millennia. "There's something else you need to know," Marek said as they finalized their preparations. "The Custodes Solis have been monitoring academic and journalistic inquiries into Vatican secrets for decades. Anyone who gets too close to the truth simply disappears. Their resources are unlimited, and their reach extends far beyond the church." He fixed Calder with a steady gaze. "If we succeed tomorrow night, you will never be safe again. They will hunt you to the ends of the earth rather than allow these secrets to become public. Are you prepared for that?" Calder thought of his comfortable life at Cambridge, his academic reputation, the predictable rhythms of university existence that had defined his adult life. All of that would be forfeit if he continued down this path. But he also thought of Lucien Roth, dying of cancer, but still determined to preserve the truth for future generations, and of Michel El-Houri, killed for getting too close to secrets that could reshape human understanding of reality itself. "Some truths are worth any price," he said finally. The crypt of St. Peter lay beneath the high altar of the basilica, accessible through passages that predated the current structure by centuries. As Calder followed Sister Therese and Marek through tunnels that seemed to descend into the very foundations of Christianity itself, he felt as though he was travelling backward through time, each step taking him deeper into the hidden history of human civilization. The papal audience above provided perfect cover for their infiltration. Thousands of faithful had gathered to hear the Pope's weekly address, their voices raised in prayer and song, creating enough acoustic disturbance to mask any sounds from the forgotten depths below. Vatican security would be focused entirely on protecting the pontiff and managing the crowds, leaving the underground passages largely unguarded. Marek led them with the confidence of someone who had spent decades memorizing every corridor and chamber in the Vatican complex. His knowledge went far beyond what any Swiss guard should have possessed, suggesting connections and access that ran deeper than his official position had indicated. The Cavea Lux Noctis lies directly beneath the papal apartments, he explained as they navigated a particularly narrow passage lined with ancient stone. It was built in the 14th century during the Avignon papacy, supposedly as a secure repository for the most sensitive documents. But the construction records show architectural features that make no sense for simple document storage. Sister Therese consulted Lucien's diagrams by the light of a small flashlight. According to these notes, the chamber was designed to house something much more significant than papers. The electrical systems are far too sophisticated, and there are references to resonance chambers and harmonic amplification. They reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron straps that bore the papal seal of Clement VI. The lock was a masterwork of medieval craftsmanship, but Marek produced an ornate key that looked as ancient as the door itself. A gift from a dying cardinal, he explained cryptically. Some secrets are too important to die with their keepers. The chamber beyond took Calder's breath away. It was larger than the room they had explored during their first expedition, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadows and walls lined with alcoves containing objects that defied easy categorization. But it was the centre of the room that commanded attention, a raised dais supporting what could only be described as a technological artifact of impossible sophistication. The device, if that was the right word, consisted of multiple crystalline structures arranged in a complex geometric pattern around a central core that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. Each crystal was unique in shape and size, but all shared the same otherworldly quality that Calder had observed in the smaller tablet he had taken from the Vatican storage room. "My God," Sister Therese whispered, "what is it?" Marek began setting up his recording equipment with practiced efficiency. "According to the documents I've seen, it's a communication device. The Vatican has been using it to maintain contact with the luminous ones for over 6 centuries. As if responding to their presence, the device began to emit a low humming sound that seemed to resonate in their bones. The light from the central core grew brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of any earthly light source." Calder approached the dais cautiously, pulling the crystalline tablet from his pocket. As he drew near the larger device, the tablet began to glow with increasing intensity, its geometric patterns shifting and flowing like living things. "It's responding to proximity," he said, his voice tight with excitement and fear. "There's some kind of quantum entanglement between these objects." The humming grew louder, and suddenly the air above the device shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Slowly, a 3-dimensional image began to form, not a hologram in any technological sense that Calder understood, but something far more sophisticated, a projection that seemed to exist in the space itself rather than being cast upon it. The figure that appeared was humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and features that suggested both great age and timeless youth, it radiated a sense of benevolent intelligence that was almost overwhelming. When it spoke, the words seemed to form directly in their minds rather than travelling through the air as sound. "You have returned to the place of covenant," the being said, its mental voice carrying harmonics of meaning that language could barely contain. "We have waited long for humans to again seek the truth that was buried beneath layers of deception." Calder found his voice with difficulty. "Are you Eli Shun?" the one mentioned in the ancient texts. I am one of those you call the luminous ones, though our true names cannot be spoken in your language. I am here because the time of concealment draws to an end, and choices must be made about the future of your species." Sister Teresa stepped forward, her theological training warring with the evidence of her senses. The Church taught us that divine revelation ended with the apostles. How do we reconcile what we're seeing with what we've been taught to believe? The being's expression conveyed something that might have been sadness tinged with patience. Your religious institutions were never meant to become ends in themselves, but rather stepping stones toward a greater understanding. The one you call Christ was indeed a teacher of great wisdom, but his message was altered by those who saw advantage in promoting worship rather than understanding. The projection gestured, and the walls of the chamber seemed to become transparent, revealing vast spaces beyond that stretched into impossible distances. Images flowed across the surfaces, ancient humans working alongside luminous beings to construct monuments that would endure for millennia, star maps showing Earth's position within a vast network of inhabited worlds, and most remarkably, scenes of human achievement guided by otherworldly intelligence. "We have watched your species for thousands of your years," the being continued. "At times we have offered guidance to those ready to receive it, but always the knowledge has been corrupted by those who would use it for power rather than enlightenment." Marek's recording equipment was capturing everything, its displays showing energy readings that exceeded anything in conventional physics. "Why reveal this now?" he asked. "Why break centuries of secrecy? Because your species stands at a threshold. The technologies you have developed give you the power to transcend your planetary boundaries, or to destroy yourselves utterly. The choice is yours, but it must be made with full knowledge of what you truly are and where you came from." The being paused, and Calder sensed vast intelligence processing information at speeds beyond human comprehension. Those who have hidden this knowledge from your people did so initially from fear, then from habit, and finally from the recognition that revelation would end their positions of power. But secrets cannot be maintained forever, and the time of disclosure approaches whether they will it or not. Behind them, the sound of footsteps echoed through the passages they had navigated to reach this place, heavy boots on stone, moving with military precision and purpose. "They have found us," Marek said grimly, checking his equipment to ensure everything was properly recorded. The luminous being seemed unsurprised by this development. The guardians of the old deceptions will not allow this knowledge to spread easily, but the truth, once released, cannot be contained. You must choose whether to preserve what you have learned or attempt to spread it to others, knowing that either choice carries great risk. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by the sound of voices speaking in rapid Italian. Security forces, probably armed, certainly authorized to use whatever force they deem necessary to protect the Vatican's deepest secrets. Sister Teresa grabbed Calder's arm. "There's another way out through the eastern passage, but we have to move now." As they prepared to flee, the luminous being offered one final gift. The crystalline tablet in Calder's pocket grew warm, and he sensed knowledge flowing into it. Coordinates, communication protocols, and most importantly locations of other sites around the world where evidence of extraterrestrial contact had been preserved. "The network of truth seekers is larger than you know," the being said, as its projection began to fade. "Find them, share what you have learned. The future of your species may depend on it." The chamber fell dark as the projection disappeared, leaving only the faint glow of the crystalline device to light their escape. Behind them, the sound of approaching security forces grew louder, but ahead lay passages that led to freedom and the most important decision any of them would ever make. The fire at the Vatican archives made international headlines for exactly 18 hours, before being relegated to brief mentions in the back pages of newspapers around the world. Officials blamed faulty electrical wiring in a storage area, expressing relief that the damage had been contained to minor documents of limited historical significance. The Vatican's publicity machine worked with practiced efficiency to minimise coverage, emphasising that all major historical treasures remained safe and accessible to researchers. Dr. Calder Vance watched the news coverage from a dingy hotel room in Naples, his hands shaking as he realised the scope of the forces arrayed against him. His university email account had been suspended pending investigation into irregularities in his travel documentation. His bank accounts were frozen, officially due to suspected credit card fraud during his trip to Italy. Most disturbingly, his academic credentials seemed to be disappearing from university databases, as if his entire career was being systematically erased. Sister Teresa El-Houri had vanished entirely. Her order claimed she had requested an extended spiritual retreat at a cloistered monastery, but when Calder attempted to verify this, he discovered that no record of such a request existed. The monastery in question had never heard of her, and church officials seemed genuinely puzzled by inquiries about her whereabouts. Marek Colvin was found dead in his Swiss apartment 3 days after their escape from the Vatican. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but Calder knew better. The old Swiss guard had lived long enough to transfer the recorded evidence to multiple secure servers before succumbing to whatever method the Custodes Solis had chosen for his elimination. But Marek's final act had been one of strategic brilliance. The recordings from the Caveat Lux Noctis, along with high-resolution images of the ancient documents and crystalline artifacts, had been uploaded to a network of servers around the world, each equipped with dead-man switches that would automatically release the information, if not reset within specified time periods. For 48 hours, the most extraordinary evidence in human history was freely available to anyone with an internet connection. The footage of the luminous being, the translation of Codex DN-77, the photographic documentation of Vatican collaboration with extraterrestrial intelligences, all of it spread across social media platforms, alternative news sites, and academic forums faster than any censorship system could contain it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the files had been downloaded millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, and analysed by experts around the world. Physicists confirmed that the energy readings from the crystalline devices showed properties that violated known laws of physics. Linguists verified that the ancient texts contained grammatical structures and vocabulary that predated known examples by centuries. Archaeologists identified architectural features in the background of the holographic projections that matched unexplained elements at ancient sites around the world. But the forces of suppression were equally swift in their response. Social media platforms began removing posts containing the leaked information, citing violations of community standards. News organisations found themselves under pressure from advertisers and government regulators. Academic institutions received visits from representatives of various intelligence agencies, expressing concern about the circulation of potentially fabricated materials. Within 48 hours, most traces of the leak had been scrubbed from major platforms. Search engines returned no results for queries related to the Vatican disclosure. News articles about the story disappeared from archives, replaced by error messages claiming the content had never existed. But the truth, once released, proved impossible to completely contain. Copies of the files survived on encrypted networks, shared through secure channels between researchers, journalists, and truth-seekers who understood the significance of what they had witnessed. The information took on a life of its own, spreading through underground networks and alternative communication channels that operated beyond the reach of conventional censorship. Calder's final message to the world was posted on an anonymous blog site just hours before his own disappearance. The post, which survived for exactly 37 minutes before being deleted, contained the coordinates provided by the luminous being and a challenge to anyone brave enough to investigate. They have rewritten salvation itself, transforming divine revelation into institutional control and cosmic truth into religious dogma. For 2,000 years, humanity has worshipped a carefully constructed mythology, while the real divine presence, our true cosmic heritage, remained hidden in underground chambers and classified archives. But the archive remembers. In hidden repositories around the world, the evidence survives. The coordinates I am sharing will lead you to some of these sites. Others can be found by following the connections revealed in the documents we have exposed. The network of truth extends far beyond what we discovered in Rome. I do not know what will become of me, or of Sister Therese, or of the brave souls who helped us expose these secrets. But I know that truth is more powerful than any institution, and consciousness more enduring than any conspiracy. Humanity deserves to know its real place in the universe, not the diminished role assigned to it by those who profit from ignorance and fear. The stars are calling to us, as they have for millennia. It is time we remembered how to listen. The blog post was deleted, the site itself disappeared, and Dr. Calder Vance was never seen again. Official records showed that he had suffered a mental breakdown during his research trip to Italy and had been admitted to a private psychiatric facility for treatment. The facility, when contacted by concerned colleagues, claimed no knowledge of any patient by that name. But in laboratories and universities around the world, in the private studies of independent researchers and the secure communications of underground networks, the work continued. The crystalline tablet that Calder had managed to preserve became the focus of intense scientific investigation, its impossible properties confirming that humanity was not alone in the universe and never had been. The truth, as the luminous being had promised, could not be contained forever, and in the quantum entanglements of crystalline consciousness and the vast networks of human curiosity, the seeds of revelation continued to grow, waiting for the moment when humanity would finally be ready to reclaim its cosmic inheritance. The archive remembered, and through its memory the future remained unwritten. Hello there, fellow truth seekers and mystery enthusiasts. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I'd love to know how your day has been treating you. What time is it where you are in the world right now? Are you settling in for the evening, or perhaps it's the middle of the night and you're seeking something to keep you company in the darkness? Wherever you are, from the bustling cities of New York to the quiet countryside of rural England, from the neon-lit streets of Tokyo to the ancient lands of Cairo, you've found your way here to Sleep Theories. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about our world's hidden history. Tonight we journey to the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, where beneath miles of ice and decades of silence something waits in the darkness. Something that suggests the greatest war in human history never truly ended. It simply moved underground. The email arrived at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November 2025, landing in Dr. Simon Krell's inbox with the kind of timing that suggested either divine intervention or careful surveillance. Krell, a 43-year-old former Cold War historian turned freelance researcher, had made a career of chasing ghosts through government archives and declassified documents. His apartment in Berlin was a maze of filing cabinets, conspiracy boards, and towers of yellowed papers that most people would consider worthless. To Krell, they were breadcrumbs leading to truths that powerful people preferred to keep buried. The sender's address was encrypted, bouncing through multiple proxy servers before reaching him. The subject line read simply, New Schwabenland, 1945. Urgent. Attached was a single scanned document, the paper so aged it appeared ready to crumble at a touch. Krell's German was fluent, a necessity in his line of work, and as he read the decoded SS communique, his hands began to tremble. The document was dated March 15th, 1945, just weeks before Hitler's supposed death in the bunker. It detailed the successful relocation of what it called priority personnel and research materials to coordinates in Queen Maud Land, Antarctica. The signature at the bottom belonged to SS Oberfuhrer Hans Kammler, a man whose disappearance after the war had puzzled historians for decades. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the document that made Krill's blood run cold. Base 211 was real, and it still hums. The accompanying email was brief. Dr. Krell, your research into Operation Paperclip caught our attention. The attached document came from my grandfather's papers. He was a Wehrmacht cryptographer who decoded this message in the final days of the war but never reported it. He said the Americans and Russians were too focused on rocket scientists to notice what else the Nazis were hiding. Find the truth. The world deserves to know. A friend in the archives. Krell printed the document immediately, then saved multiple copies to encrypted drives. In 30 years of research, he had never seen anything quite like this. Base 211 was a legendary Nazi installation rumoured to exist in Antarctica, dismissed by mainstream historians as fantasy. But here was documentation suggesting it was not only real but operational as late as March 1945. He spent the next 72 hours cross-referencing the document's details with existing historical records. The communique mentioned device theta and something called vril research, terms that appeared in fragmentary SS documents but had never been fully explained. Most intriguingly, it referenced the transport of 146 priority personnel via U-boat convoy to the coordinates 71 degrees south, 11 degrees east, deep in the heart of Queen Maud Land. Krell's research had taught him that the most important truths were often hidden in the spaces between official records, the gaps, inconsistencies, the stories that didn't quite add up. And as he dug deeper into the Antarctic mystery, he began to find those gaps everywhere. The trail led Krell to the US National Archives in College Park, Maryland, where he had maintained research privileges since his doctoral work. Flying to Washington felt like stepping back in time. The archives building still smelled like old paper and bureaucratic secrets. Krell requested files on Operation Paperclip, the program that brought Nazi scientists to America after the war, focusing specifically on personnel records from 1945 to 1947. What he found was a masterclass in selective documentation. While the files meticulously tracked prominent figures like Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger, dozens of lesser-known scientists had gaps in their records during the crucial period between Germany's surrender and their arrival in the United States. The files simply noted location unknown or transit period for months at a time. Even more suspicious were the U-boat records. Krell had researched the German submarine fleet extensively during his academic career, and he knew that several U-boats had surrendered in Argentina months after the war's official end. U-530 arrived in Mar del Plata on July 10th, 1945, nearly 2 months after Germany's surrender. U-977 followed on August 17th. Both crews claimed they had been hiding in the South Atlantic, afraid to surrender, but their stories contained inconsistencies that Allied intelligence had apparently chosen to ignore. The captain of U-530, Otto Vermuth, had been interrogated extensively, but those transcripts remained classified. Krell could only access a summary that noted subject provided contradictory statements regarding vessels' activities between May and July 1945. More telling was a note in U-977's file. Vessels' fuel consumption patterns inconsistent with claimed route. Possible undisclosed stops in Southern Ocean. Krell's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching in a Berlin archive, he discovered the contact information for Alina Dorn, daughter of former Wehrmacht cryptographer Wilhelm Dorn. Now 78 and living in a small apartment in Munich, Alina had spent decades trying to understand her father's war experience. When Krell called her, she was initially suspicious. Too many sensationalist writers had contacted her over the years, seeking dramatic stories about Nazi conspiracies. But something in Krell's methodical approach and detailed knowledge convinced her to meet. They sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by her father's papers and photographs. Wilhelm Dorn had been a communications specialist assigned to intercepting Allied transmissions. But in the war's final weeks, he had also decoded German messages, including some that were never supposed to reach higher command. "My father carried a terrible burden," Alina said, pouring tea with hands that shook slightly. He decoded many messages in those last days, but one haunted him until his death. It spoke of continuation, of plans that extended beyond Germany's defeat. She handed Krell a faded transcript in her father's handwriting. It was dated April 30th, 1945, the day Hitler supposedly died in his bunker. The message was fragmentary but clear enough. "Southern installation operational. Package delivered successfully. Awaiting further personnel transfer." "What did your father think it meant?" Krell asked. Alina's eyes grew distant. 3 days before he died, when the cancer had made him delirious, he grabbed my hand and said something I'll never forget. "The war never ended, Alina. It moved beneath the ice. They're still down there waiting." Back in his Berlin apartment, Krell spread the evidence across his main research table like pieces of a vast, dark puzzle. The Nazi documents, the U-boat records, Wilhelm Dorn's transcripts, they all pointed toward Antarctica. But if there had been a secret Nazi base there, surely the Allies would have discovered it eventually. That thought led him to Operation High Jump, the massive US Navy expedition to Antarctica, led by Admiral Richard Byrd in 1946-47. Officially, High Jump was described as a training exercise and scientific expedition, but the scale seemed enormous for such purposes. 13 ships, 4,700 personnel, and enough supplies for an 8-month deployment. Krell had researched Byrd briefly during his graduate work, but now he dove deep into the Admiral's post-war activities. What he found was a pattern of contradictions and unexplained early terminations. Operation High Jump was planned to last 8 months, but was cut short after just 10 weeks. The official reason was weather conditions, but Krell found evidence that the expedition had faced the mildest Antarctic summer in recent memory. More intriguing was Byrd's behaviour after returning from Antarctica. The Admiral, normally gregarious with the press, became oddly reticent about the expedition's discoveries. But in one interview with a Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, published on March the 5th, 1947, Byrd made a statement that had puzzled researchers for decades. "I can assure you that America must now prepare itself for the eventuality that the country will be attacked by flying objects that can fly from pole to pole at incredible speed." What could have prompted such a bizarre warning from a respected naval officer? Krell submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for Operation High Jump records, knowing it would take months to process. But his contacts in the research community proved valuable. Dr. Sarah Chen, a historian at the Naval War College, had been studying Cold War military operations and had obtained partial high jump files through her own FOIA requests. "The after-action reports are heavily redacted," she told Krell during a Skype call, "but there are references to unidentified aerial phenomena and at least one incident involving the loss of an aircraft under circumstances described as impossible according to known physics." She forwarded him what she had, fragments of reports that painted a picture of an expedition that encountered far more than weather and wildlife. One partially legible entry described metallic object emerging from ice ridge approximately 0800 hours, and craft demonstrated flight characteristics inconsistent with known technology. Most chilling was a note that one Navy aircraft had been destroyed by unknown forces, no evidence of conventional weapons fire. Krell cross-referenced these reports with personnel records and found that several high jump participants had been reassigned to classified projects immediately after returning from Antarctica. Some had their security clearances elevated, others were quietly transferred to remote postings. The pattern suggested a deliberate effort to scatter the expedition's witnesses across the military bureaucracy. But one name kept appearing in the margins of various reports: Commander James Morrison, who had served as Byrd's intelligence liaison during High Jump. Morrison had retired from the Navy in 1950 and spent his final years writing what were dismissed as science fiction novels. Krell ordered Morrison's books and found them filled with detailed descriptions of underground Nazi installations and advanced aircraft technology. Most dismissed them as fantasy, but Krell recognised elements that matched the SS documents he'd received. Morrison's final novel, published posthumously in 1974, included a dedication that made Krell's skin crawl. To those who went beneath the ice and never returned, and to those who stayed behind to guard secrets that must someday be revealed. Getting to Antarctica legally would have required months of bureaucratic navigation, scientific justification, and international permits. Krell didn't have months, and his research had convinced him that official channels would likely be monitored by people who preferred that certain secrets remain buried. Instead, he contacted Jacob Riis, a Norwegian glaciologist he had met at a conference on climate change in 2019. Riis was respected in academic circles, but had a reputation for bending rules when scientific curiosity demanded it. More importantly, he had access to research stations in Queen Maud Land and a network of contacts who could arrange unofficial transportation. "You understand this is completely illegal," Riis said during their encrypted video call. "If we're caught, both our careers are finished, and that's assuming we don't die in the ice." "The coordinates in these documents," Krell replied, showing him the Nazi communique on camera. "How far are they from the Norwegian research stations?" Riis studied the numbers, cross-referencing them with his geological surveys. "About 40 kilometres from Troll Station. It's in a region we've mapped for ice density, but never excavated. Very stable ice formations, perfect for..." He paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. Perfect for hiding something underground. They spent 2 weeks planning the expedition. Riis would submit a routine geological survey request, using his credentials to arrange transport to Troll Station. From there, they would take a small research vehicle to the coordinates, ostensibly to collect ice core samples. If the Nazi documents were accurate, they should find evidence of the entrance to Base 211 within a few hundred metres of the specified location. The flight to Antarctica was surreal. Krell pressed his face to the aircraft window as they flew over the endless white expanse, trying to imagine Nazi U-boats navigating these frozen waters in 1945. The logistics alone seemed impossible, yet here was documented evidence that it had happened. Troll Station was a cluster of modern buildings rising from the ice like a technological oasis. Riis introduced Krell as a climate researcher studying historical ice formations, and the station personnel accepted the cover story without question. Within 24 hours they were travelling across the ice in a modified snowcat, following GPS coordinates toward their destination. The landscape was hypnotically monotonous. Endless white, broken only by the occasional ice ridge or crevasse. But as they approached the coordinates from the Nazi document, the terrain began to change. The ice here was different, formed in unnatural patterns that suggested human intervention decades earlier. "There," Riis said, pointing toward a slight depression in the ice about a kilometre ahead. "That's not natural formation. Something was built there and then covered." They parked the snowcat and began scanning with ground-penetrating radar. Within an hour they had found it. A shaft carved into the ice, sealed but clearly artificial. Using thermal lance equipment supposedly meant for ice core sampling, they began cutting through the seal. The opening they created was barely wide enough for a person, but it led downward into perfect darkness. Krell rappelled down first, his headlamp beam revealing carved ice walls that showed tool marks from the 1940s. After 30 metres, the shaft opened into a vast underground chamber. What they found defied belief. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, carved from the living ice, and reinforced with steel beams that still bore SS markings. Along the walls stood rows of rusted machinery, most of it unidentifiable but clearly sophisticated for its era. Workbenches held blueprints and technical drawings, many featuring disc-shaped aircraft labelled with German text. "Hanebu 4, Krell read from one of the clearer blueprints. "Look at these specifications. This is describing an aircraft with flight characteristics that shouldn't have been possible in 1945. Deeper in the complex they found living quarters, still furnished with Nazi banners and propaganda posters. The communications room contained radio equipment and codebooks, suggesting the base had maintained contact with the outside world long after Germany's surrender. Most of the equipment was frozen and corroded beyond use, but the preservation was remarkable. It was in the deepest chamber that they found the most unsettling discovery. The room was circular, with concentric rings carved into the floor around a central platform. Strange symbols covered the walls, some recognisably German, others unlike anything Krell had seen before. Equipment surrounded the platform, much of it more advanced than anything else in the facility, and at the centre of it all was a device that defied description. It was roughly spherical, about 2 meters in diameter, made of a metal that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams. Cables ran from it to various control panels, and despite having been abandoned for decades, the device emitted a faint humming sound and pulsed with an almost imperceptible blue light. "This is still active," Reese whispered, his voice echoing in the chamber. "After all these years, it's still running." Krell approached the device carefully, noting the combination of Nazi engineering and something else, symbols and design elements that seemed far older than the Third Reich. The blueprints scattered around the chamber referred to vril energy and zero-point extraction, terms that appeared in fringe Nazi research but had never been fully explained by historians. They were so absorbed in documenting their discoveries that they almost missed the soft footsteps echoing from the entrance shaft. The armed men who descended into the chamber moved with professional precision, their faces hidden behind tactical masks and night vision goggles. Krell and Rice found themselves surrounded before they could react, the barrels of automatic weapons trained on them with unwavering steadiness. "Dr. Simon Krell," one of the figures said in accented English, "we have been monitoring your research activities. You have displayed remarkable persistence." They were escorted deeper into the complex through passages that Krell and Rice hadn't discovered during their initial exploration. The facility was far larger than they had imagined, extending through multiple levels carved into the ice. Some sections showed signs of recent maintenance, with modern lighting and climate control systems keeping key areas functional. They were brought to what appeared to be a command centre, where an elderly man sat behind a desk studying their confiscated camera equipment. He was perhaps 75, with pale blue eyes and silver hair, wearing a simple grey uniform without insignia. When he spoke, his English was perfect but carried the unmistakable accent of pre-war Germany. "I am Anton Vogle," he said, gesturing for them to sit in metal chairs facing his desk. "I apologise for the dramatic reception, but unauthorised visitors to this facility present certain security concerns." "This place has been abandoned for decades," Krell said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What security concerns?" Vogle smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Abandoned? Dr. Krell, I was born in this facility in 1951. My father was Hans Kammler's chief engineer. This installation has been continuously occupied since its establishment in 1943. The revelation hit Krell like a physical blow. That's impossible. The war ended in 1945. The war as the world understood it ended in 1945, Vogle corrected. But you have discovered the reality that historians prefer to ignore. A significant portion of the SS leadership, along with our most advanced research programs, were relocated here before Berlin fell. The plan was to wait out the chaos of the post-war period and emerge when conditions were favourable for the Reich's continuation. Rice found his voice. "But it's been 80 years. What happened?" Vogle's expression grew melancholy. "Reality, Mr. Rice. The polar environment proved more challenging than anticipated. The vril devices that powered our facility suffered a catastrophic failure in 1962. Most of the original personnel died in the subsequent reactor breach. Those who survived faced a choice: remain and slowly die in isolation, or leave and attempt to integrate into the outside world." "And you chose to stay?" "Someone had to maintain the installation, to preserve the records and research. to ensure that when the time was right, the knowledge could be retrieved. Vogle stood and walked to a bank of monitors showing various sections of the complex. But I am the last permanent resident. The others left years ago. Left to where? Krell demanded. Vogle's smile returned, colder this time. Into your world, Doctor, Krell. The technology you discovered here did not remain buried. Much of what your modern world considers cutting-edge innovation has far older origins than you might suspect. He led them to another chamber, this one filled with modern computer equipment and communication arrays. Multiple screens showed news feeds from around the world, stock market data, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from major cities. The surviving members of our community have been quite successful in their integration, Vogle continued. Aerospace companies, technology corporations, government research facilities, they have excelled in many fields. After all, they had a considerable head start in certain areas of development. The implications of his words were staggering. Krell thought of the mysterious gaps in Operation Paperclip records, the Nazi scientists whose locations had been unknown for months or years after the war. You're saying that Nazi technology has been influencing modern development? Nazi technology, Vogle laughed. Dr. Krell. What we discovered here was far older than the Reich. The symbols you saw in the Vril chamber, they predate human civilization. We simply learned to harness forces that have existed since the dawn of time. He showed them photographs and documents spanning decades, images of disc-shaped aircraft that looked remarkably similar to modern UFO sightings, technical specifications for propulsion systems that seemed to defy conventional physics, personnel files showing individuals with German names occupying key positions in aerospace and technology companies around the world. But the most important truth, Vogle said, is that we never intended to remain hidden forever. This facility was designed as a repository, a seed bank for knowledge that would eventually be released when humanity was ready to receive it. And when will that be? Rice asked. Vogle studied them both carefully. Perhaps sooner than you think. Your presence here suggests that someone with access to our wartime communications, believes that time has come. He handed Krell a small metallic device, no larger than a smartphone. This contains a complete record of our research, including the locations of other installations that were established during the Reich's final years. Greenland, Patagonia, the Gobi Desert. We were more thorough in our preparations than history records. Why are you giving this to me? Because the world is entering a period of unprecedented technological acceleration. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, aerospace development. These fields are advancing so rapidly that humanity may soon uncover our secrets whether we reveal them or not. It is better that the truth emerges from legitimate academic research than from military intelligence agencies. Vogle escorted them back through the complex, pointing out details they had missed during their initial exploration. The facility was indeed vast, with sections extending deep into the ice. Some areas remained sealed, their contents too dangerous to access without proper precautions. The device you observed in the Vril chamber, he explained, is a power source that taps into what your modern physicists call zero-point energy. It has been running continuously since 1944, requiring no fuel or maintenance. The technology could revolutionize your civilization, or destroy it if misused. As they reached the entrance shaft, Vogle handed them additional equipment, oxygen masks and a small device that he attached to Krell's wrist. The compound I am about to administer will temporarily suppress your short-term memory formation. You will remember this facility, but the specific details of its location and our conversation will fade over the next few weeks. This is for your protection as much as ours. Wait, Krell protested, but Vogle had already activated the device on his wrist. A sharp pinprick followed by a sensation of floating detachment. The memory suppression is not permanent, Vogle's voice seemed to come from a great distance. When the time is right, when the world is ready for these revelations, the suppression will fade. Consider it a temporal lock, ensuring the information emerges at the proper moment. The last thing Krell remembered clearly was climbing up the shaft toward the surface, Race helping him navigate the ropes with hands that felt strangely numb. Krell woke up in his Berlin apartment 6 weeks later with a splitting headache and gaps in his memory that felt like missing teeth. His research notes from the Antarctic expedition were scattered across his desk, but many of the details seemed frustratingly vague. He remembered finding the base, remembered the Nazi equipment and the strange circular chamber, but the specifics kept slipping away when he tried to focus on them. Race was experiencing similar problems. During their debriefing calls, both men struggled to reconstruct exactly what they had discovered. They had photographs and video recordings of the facility, clear evidence of its existence, but the deeper implications of their discovery remained maddeningly elusive. "It's like trying to remember a dream," Race said during one of their conversations. "I know we found something important, something that changes everything, but the details keep dissolving." Krell threw himself into research, trying to piece together the fragments of his Antarctic experience with his broader investigation into Nazi survival theories. He published a preliminary paper on the discovery of Base 211, but without the specific technological details that had been suppressed, it read more like speculative fiction than serious historical analysis. The breakthrough came 3 months later in the form of nightmares. They started as vague dreams of underground chambers and humming machinery, but gradually became more specific. Krell found himself dreaming of the circular chamber in the base, of the strange device at its centre, of Vogle's cold smile as he explained the truth about Nazi survival. He began keeping a dream journal, recording every detail he could remember upon waking. It was while reviewing these journal entries that he noticed the symbols. Scattered throughout his notes were sketches of designs he didn't remember drawing, complex geometric patterns, equations written in notation he didn't recognise, and most importantly, rough maps showing locations around the world. As he studied these unconscious creations, memories began filtering back, not complete recollections, but fragments of his conversation with Vogle. The memory suppression compound was wearing off, just as Vogle had promised. Krell spread the dream maps across his research table, cross-referencing them with his original Nazi documents and geological surveys. The patterns were clear: installations in Greenland near the Thule Air Base, hidden facilities in the Patagonian icefields, and something large buried beneath the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. Each location corresponded to areas that had been visited by Nazi expeditions in the years before World War II. The Ahnenerbe, Himmler's occult research organisation, had sent teams to these remote regions supposedly searching for evidence of ancient Aryan civilizations. But what if they had been doing more than archaeological research? The metallic device Vogle had given him was still in his possession, though for months it had seemed like nothing more than an unusually dense paperweight. But as his memories returned, he began to understand its significance. Late one night, working alone in his apartment, he activated the device using a sequence of touches that felt familiar, despite his conscious mind not remembering how he knew them. The device projected a holographic display showing a 3-dimensional map of the world. Dozens of locations were marked with pulsing points of light, indicating active installations. Most were in remote areas, Arctic regions, mountain ranges, deep deserts, but some were disturbingly close to major population centres. A data stream accompanied the display, showing personnel movements, technological transfers, and what appeared to be a coordinated network of influence spanning governments, corporations and research institutions worldwide. Names appeared that Krell recognised from his research into Operation Paperclip and its aftermath, but these individuals were listed as active operatives as recently as 2024. The scope of the revelation was overwhelming. The Nazi survival in Antarctica hadn't been an isolated pocket of resistance. It had been the coordination point for a global network that had been quietly influencing world events for 8 decades. Krell's hands shook as he copied the data onto encrypted drives. This was more than historical curiosity. It was evidence of an ongoing conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of modern civilization. but it was also incredibly dangerous knowledge. If Vogle was telling the truth about the network's reach and influence, exposing it prematurely could have catastrophic consequences. He thought about Vogle's warning that the world might soon uncover these secrets regardless of his actions. The rapid advancement of technology, the increasing sophistication of satellite surveillance, the democratization of information through the internet, all of these factors made long-term secrecy increasingly difficult to maintain. Perhaps that was why Vogle had chosen to reveal the truth to an academic researcher, rather than a government agency. Independent historians might be better positioned to release information gradually, allowing society to adapt rather than panic. Krell began planning his next move. The device contained location data for dozens of installations, but visiting them all would require resources and legitimacy that he currently lacked. He needed allies, other researchers who could investigate different locations simultaneously, building a comprehensive picture of the network's scope before anyone could suppress their findings. But first, he had to decide whether humanity was ready for the truth about what had been hiding beneath the ice for the past 80 years. As he sat in his apartment, surrounded by evidence of the most significant historical conspiracy ever uncovered, Krell recorded his final thoughts in his research journal. The Third Reich may have fallen in Berlin in 1945, but what it discovered in the years before its defeat, what it preserved in the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, has been quietly reshaping our world ever since. The technology in our pockets, the aircraft in our skies, the very trajectory of human development over the past 8 decades may owe more to Nazi research than we ever imagined. But perhaps more disturbing is the possibility that the Nazis themselves were not the originators of this knowledge. Vogle spoke of forces and technologies that predated human civilization. If he was telling the truth, then we're not just dealing with the survival of a political ideology, but with the recovery of ancient knowledge that could either elevate humanity to unprecedented heights or destroy us entirely. The memory suppression is fully fading now. I remember everything. Vogle's face, the humming of the Vril device, the maps showing installations across the globe. The question is no longer whether this network exists, but how to expose it without triggering catastrophic consequences. The war never ended. It simply moved beneath the ice, and now it's emerging into the light of day. What rises from that frozen darkness may determine the future of human civilization itself. Krell closed the journal and looked out his window at the lights of Berlin, wondering how many of the technologies illuminating the city had their true origins in the frozen chambers beneath Antarctica. The truth was surfacing, just as Vogle had predicted. The only question was whether the world was ready to accept what had been hiding in the shadows for the past 80 years. In the distance, an aircraft passed overhead, its lights blinking in perfect formation against the night sky. Krell watched it disappear into the darkness and wondered if he was looking at technology that had first taken flight in the secret hangars of Base 211, decades before the world was ready to understand what it was witnessing. The Last Reich had not ended with Hitler's death in a Berlin bunker. It had simply gone underground, beneath the ice, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And that moment, Krell realized with growing certainty, was rapidly approaching. The secrets beneath the ice were stirring, and soon the world would have to confront the truth about what had been waiting in the frozen darkness all these years. The Reich had not died. It had simply learned to adapt, to evolve, to influence from the shadows. But shadows cannot hide forever, and the light of revelation was beginning to penetrate even the deepest underground chambers. What would emerge from that light remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. The world would never be the same once the truth about the Last Reich finally came to the surface. 6 months after his return from Antarctica, Krell received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was synthesized, digitally altered beyond recognition, but the words were crystal clear. Dr. Krell, we know what you discovered beneath the ice. We know about the device Vogle gave you, and we know you've been mapping our installations. It's time we met. The meeting was arranged for midnight at the Brandenburg Gate, a location so public that violence seemed impossible. Krell arrived early, watching the tourists and late-night revellers pass by the iconic monument. At exactly midnight, a woman approached him, mid-40s, professionally dressed with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I am Dr. Elizabeth Weber," she said in perfect English with only the faintest hint of a German accent. "I represent what you might call the administrative council of the network you've been investigating." "The Nazi network," Krill said bluntly. Weber smiled, but it was neither warm nor cold, simply professional. "That terminology is outdated, Doctor. Krell. What began as a survival mechanism for Reich personnel has evolved into something far more sophisticated. We prefer to think of ourselves as custodians of advanced knowledge." She handed him a tablet displaying a news article dated that very day. "Breakthrough in quantum propulsion technology promises revolutionary advances in space travel." The article featured Dr. Hans Müller, a physicist at the European Space Agency, whose biography showed he'd been born in Argentina in 1952. Dr. Müller's grandparents were part of the original Antarctic expedition, Weber explained. "The propulsion technology he invented has been in our archives since 1944. We've been gradually releasing such innovations when we determine humanity is ready for them." Krell stared at the article, his mind racing. How many others? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Not all of them know their true heritage, of course. Many are simply brilliant individuals who happen to be hired by companies we influence, working on projects guided by principles they believe they discovered independently. Weber began walking along the path beside the monument, and Krell fell into step beside her. "The network operates on a simple principle. Technological advancement must be managed to prevent catastrophic misuse. Your species has a remarkable capacity for turning any discovery into a weapon. And you appointed yourselves as guardians of human progress." "Someone had to," Weber replied matter-of-factly. "The alternative was allowing uncontrolled development of technologies that could have destroyed civilization decades ago. The Vril devices alone, if released prematurely, could have triggered conflicts that would have made your world wars look like minor skirmishes." They stopped beneath a streetlight, and Weber activated her own tablet, showing Krell a series of satellite images. "These are the installations you've identified using Vogle's device. What you don't realise is that they're all connected through a quantum communication network that allows instantaneous coordination across the globe." The images showed the locations Krell had mapped, but with additional details visible through advanced imaging techniques. Each site appeared to be far larger than he had estimated, with underground complexes extending for kilometres beneath the surface. "The Greenland facility houses our climate management systems," Weber continued. "The Patagonian installation focuses on biological research and preservation. The Gobi Desert Complex serves as our primary manufacturing centre for advanced materials, and Antarctica remains our central coordination hub." "Climate management?" Krell's voice was barely a whisper. "Doctor, Krell, what do you think has prevented your planet from experiencing runaway greenhouse effects despite 8 decades of industrial expansion? Pure luck. The climate systems we've deployed have been quietly regulating atmospheric conditions, buying your species time to develop sustainable technologies." The implications were staggering. If Weber was telling the truth, the network hadn't just been influencing technological development, they had been actively managing planetary systems to prevent environmental collapse. "But why reveal this to me?" Krell asked. "Why not just continue operating in secret?" Weber's expression grew serious. "Because the secrecy is becoming impossible to maintain. Satellite surveillance, artificial intelligence, global communication networks. Your own technological advancement is approaching the point where our activities will be detected regardless of our precautions." She showed him another series of images, these depicting modern facilities around the world. "We estimate we have perhaps 5 years before independent researchers or government agencies uncover our operations through conventional means. It's better that the revelation comes from legitimate academic sources than from military intelligence agencies. What do you want from me? Help us manage the disclosure, Weber said. Your reputation as a historian gives you credibility that our own people lack. We need someone to serve as an intermediary, to help humanity adjust to the reality of our existence without triggering panic or conflict. Krell thought about Vogle's words in the Antarctic base, about the temporal lock that had been placed on his memories. This was planned from the beginning, wasn't it? Vogle knew you would contact me. Anton has always been forward-thinking, Weber admitted. He believed that eventually we would need allies outside the network to help bridge the gap between our world and yours. She handed him a card with only a phone number printed on it. Think about our offer, Dr. Krell, but don't take too long. Events are accelerating faster than we anticipated. As Weber turned to leave, Krell called after her. The ancient technology you mentioned, the knowledge that predates human civilization. What is it really? Weber paused, looking back at him with an expression that might have been pity. That, Doctor. Krell, is a conversation for another time. Humanity isn't ready for those revelations yet, but when you are, we'll be here to guide you through them. She disappeared into the shadows beyond the monument, leaving Krell alone with questions that would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. Krell returned to his apartment and opened his research journal one last time. As he wrote, he could hear aircraft passing overhead with increasing frequency, their flight patterns suggesting technologies that conventional aviation couldn't explain. The choice before me is clear but terrifying, he wrote. I can expose the network immediately, revealing the truth about 80 years of hidden influence and risking global chaos. Or I can become part of their disclosure process, helping to manage humanity's introduction to realities that will fundamentally change our understanding of history, technology, and our place in the universe. Weber spoke of knowledge that predates human civilization, of technologies so advanced that they could either elevate us or destroy us. The network has been serving as a buffer, gradually introducing innovations while preventing catastrophic misuse. But that protection comes at the cost of truth, of humanity's right to make its own choices about its future. I think of Vogle, alone in his Antarctic fortress, maintaining systems that have been running since before I was born. I think of the thousands of people working in technology companies around the world, unknowingly implementing designs created in underground laboratories decades ago. I think of the climate system supposedly protecting our planet from environmental collapse. If the network is telling the truth, then everything we think we know about the past 80 years of human progress is a carefully managed illusion. Our greatest achievements may be nothing more than the controlled release of knowledge that has been waiting in frozen vaults since the darkest days of the 20th century. But perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that this is just the beginning. Weber's mention of pre-human knowledge suggests that the Nazi discoverers were themselves based on something far older and more mysterious. We may be approaching not just a revelation about recent history, but a fundamental rewriting of human understanding about our origins and destiny. The Third Reich may have fallen, but what it found beneath the ice is still rising, and soon, very soon, the world will have to confront the reality that we have never been alone in shaping our own future. The war never ended. It simply evolved into something we're only beginning to understand, and whether that evolution leads to humanity's elevation or its destruction may depend on choices we're about to be forced to make. The secrets beneath the ice are no longer content to remain hidden. They're coming to the surface, and when they fully emerge, nothing will ever be the same again. Krell closed the journal and looked out at the Berlin skyline, where strange lights moved among the stars with purpose and intelligence that defied conventional explanation. The Last Reich was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was preparing to step into the light, and humanity was about to discover that its greatest challenge wasn't in the past, but in the future that was rapidly approaching. The humming beneath the ice had become a roar that could no longer be ignored. The question was no longer whether the truth would emerge, but whether the world would survive its revelation. In the distance, the lights continued their silent dance across the night sky. heralds of a new age that was about to dawn, an age when humanity would finally learn what had been waiting in the frozen darkness all these years, and what price they would have to pay for the knowledge that was about to be unleashed upon the world. The Last Reich was rising, and its emergence would mark the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one that would make all previous conflicts and discoveries seem like mere preparation for what was to come. Thank you for joining us for this journey into the frozen mysteries of our hidden history. If you enjoyed this exploration of what might be waiting beneath the ice, please remember to subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about our world. Until next time, sleep well, but perhaps keep one eye on the sky, watching for lights that move with purpose beyond our understanding. The truth is out there, waiting in the cold and darkness, and it's closer than you think.